Hello kids, this is just a quick video giving you some instruction on how to work through the chapter 6 worksheet if you're having some trouble. A few days ago I released a video on how to work through the chapter 4 worksheet. So, since you're not in class to do this, uh, I think this is the next best thing, so to speak. So anyways, you have your chapter 6 worksheet. I'll just kind of scroll on this a little bit. Move me a little bit here. Trying to make myself a little smaller here. I mean, who needs to see me? You know what? I'm just going to do this. Bye. Okay. So you have your sheet. You have your first question, and it's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt. Okay. Let me just kind of get rid of a couple things here. Basically, the way you answer this question is just try to use the source interpretation method when you're going about looking at this source. So in other words, deconstruct the source, break it apart, try to identify a perspective that the source might have. Try to throw in a little content and context. What was the content of the situation going on here? What was the context behind it? And then link it to liberalism. How does the source relate to, support, reject, challenge liberal principles? And try to use specific language. Okay, specific as in it relates to the economic principle of self-reliance, etc. So yes, that's worth 4 points. This one, like I said, is pretty much a gimme. As long as you give me something, I'm going to give you a point on that. All I want you to do is read up about the first Red Scare that occurred right during or right after World War One. Okay, this is not to be confused with McCarthyism that occurred in the late 40s into the early 50s. All right. Continuing on, campaign slogans, once again, Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge were a reaction against Woodrow Wilson and his progressive policy. So these guys were more right-wing, more laissez-faire, more conservative. So think of conservative, laissez-faire, classical liberal type of slogans. Okay. This one is straight from the textbook. And you can certainly answer this in point form. Why was it the most capitalist time? What were some of the things that were occurring in the United States during the 1920s that moved it away from progressivism, moved it away from welfare capitalism to more of a just straight laissez-faire, overproduction, stock speculation, etc. All right. The next question is worth 5 points. This mind map. Develop either a point form set of notes or some sort of mind map. Probably if you're doing this on computer, point form is about the only way you can do this, of how the United States was led into the stock market crash in 1929 and what happened as a result of it. Okay, so you can put that in point form. Talk about some of the causes of the stock market crash. Talk about some of the results of the stock market crash. And that's all in your textbook. All right, the next question is once again in point form or specific form, mind map, whatever you want to do. Outline what was Roosevelt's New Deal. Now, Roosevelt's New Deal, of course, was using Keynesian government instituted principles in order to bring about more equity, more equality. Okay, so give me some examples of things that Roosevelt tried to do in order to bring about more equality within American society. Okay, think about things like the alphabet agencies, think about all the make work projects, the Keynesian principles in action, so to speak. This one is you're comparing what did Franklin Roosevelt do differently than, say, Obama, or what they did that was similar. One of the things that was similar to Obama is President Obama became president at the time of an economic downturn back in 2008. And so compare how he reacted to the economic situation versus how did Roosevelt react. And that will be in your textbook. How did Canada respond to the Great Depression? Identify areas in which they responded, some of the government programs, some of the things that Prime Minister King instituted at the time. And that will be in your text. Again, you can refer to your notes or the textbook to help you answer this question. The overarching theme here is that most Western societies following World War II decided that it was necessary to have more social programs involved in their with their citizens. Okay, to the point where um, they became welfare states. And so, give me examples of unemployment insurance. Give me examples of old age pensions, Social Security that turned Canada, United States away from just a welfare capitalist state to more of a welfare state. All right, this question is describing what a monetarist is. What is monetarism? Simply, it has to do with the manipulation of the monetary policy within a country, the money supply. And really, all three of these gentlemen, Friedman, Hayek, and Adam Smith, are on the right side of the economic spectrum, on the laissez faire side, but you should be able to identify subtle differences between, especially Friedman and Hayek. Smith, a little bit different because he's certainly not a contemporary of the other two. I mean, Adam Smith lived in the 1700s, whereas Friedman and Hayek were alive in the 1900s. And so make sure you can kind of describe the subtle differences between at least the first two gentlemen. Now compare monetarism, the manipulation of the money supply, with Keynesian economics. And the big thing you need to understand is that Keynesians also believe in manipulating the money supply, but they also believe in manipulating the fiscal or spending policy of a government. Okay, so it's much more involved economically on the government level. So make sure you understand that Keynesians are more middle economically, whereas monetarists are more to the right economically. Okay, and so when we compare monetarists, we think especially Friedman. Hayek, I wouldn't put him in the same vein of a monetarist as Friedman, but he's certainly closer to Friedman than John Maynard Keynes was. Okay. I explained this in the slide presentation yesterday. Make sure that you know the difference between demand side, consumer driven economics versus supply side or production incentives. Okay. That you'll understand that modern liberals would support demand side economics, whereas classical liberals, conservatives would support more supply side. And understand there's different synonyms for demand side. When we think of demand side, we think of Keynesian economics. Okay. Whereas supply side, we think of trickle down economics. On the bottom here, it talks about placing yourself somewhere on the spectrum and providing a rationale. Are you more on the demand side? Are you more on the supply side? Are you somewhere in the middle? Just defend your assertion. There are a number of clips about the Swedish economic system, both pro and con. All the Michael Moore videos are certainly going to be in support of Sweden and their economic system, whereas the Johan Nordberg video clips are going to be very critical of Sweden. Also, look in your textbook on page 225, 227 to help you answer that question. It just says explain the perspective of the people interviewed within the clip. Once again, you can put this in point form. Okay. How does the Swedish experience differ from the Canadian experience? I mean, what essentially is different, concerning Sweden than Canada? I mean, the big thing I think you need to understand with Sweden is that they're even further to the left economically than we are. They're even more of a welfare state than Canada. And so, how do you pay for that welfare state? Well, you have to take out more in taxes. So do a little research on that. All right, you have an article called Canada's Economy, and it's asking you out of that article, if you had to cut 5 areas, where would they be, and provide a rationale. So the areas would be on the next page. And so you would look at things like universal health care. You'd look at education. You would maybe look at police service. Maybe it's unemployment insurance or family allowance or old age pension. So maybe you want to cut the CBC or Canada Post. Maybe instead of making them national industries, you want to privatize them, sell them off to private entities, so to speak, in order to save government money. And so just pick 5 of those areas or 5 of those examples and provide a rationale for it. Okay. Some key terms you need to look at, a few notes on where our taxation money goes to and how it's divvied up as far as federally, provincially, and locally. Some more notes, the difference between direct and indirect taxes. Please read that. Okay, I know I lectured on it yesterday, but please read that. This just gives you a very straightforward look at the difference between progressive and flat tax. Certainly, this isn't tax brackets that your parents have to pay through, but this gives you a fairly simplistic look at it. Please refer to my lesson to give you a little bit more of a detailed look at a tax bracket. There's a question here. It just says, what type of taxation system do you think is best? Pick flat or progressive. What do your taxes pay for? What is this redistribution policy? So you make sure you answer those 3 questions. Okay, what does redistribution mean to you? The final question deals with placing these individuals on a spectrum. Obviously, you're going to put Hayek and Friedman further to the right, Keynes more to the middle, provide a rationale for that. Down here on the bottom, Tommy Douglas, the founder of socialism in Canada, modern NDP. He would be further to the left. He's not extreme left, but he's certainly not center either. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were both followers of Hayek and Friedman, and so I would put them further to the right. Okay, so anyways, that should give you a fairly thorough overview of this chapter 6 assignment. The last part here is just some more readings talking to you about the difference between what monetary policy versus fiscal policy. Okay, so make sure you read that you know the difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy. Governments from time to time change their fiscal policy. The banks will change monetary policy. All right. I think that's it. And once again, I'll throw some more videos up tomorrow. More than likely, it's the chapter 8 video tomorrow. So until then, take care.